So thank you so much for joining me for today's Art Chat conversation. This is a series of conversations that took place during the run of our Landscape, Climate, the Environment, and Beyond exhibition. And these chats feature conversations with some of the artists who are included in the exhibition. You do still have a little bit of time left to see the exhibition if you haven't already done so. It closes on Sunday, May 19th. And we're very pleased today to have the artist Jennifer Lynn Bates joining us. Jennifer Lynn Bates is an assistant professor of fine arts at Hawkeye Community College. She earned a Master of Fine Arts in Painting from Pratt Institute and a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Art and Design from Iowa State University. She's a practicing visual artist living and working in the Cedar Valley, and she enjoys reading, hiking, and going on bike rides with her imaginative husband and two lovely daughters. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start with the piece that's in the exhibition, Flood 08, and I think it may make sense to actually start with a video that was produced by Hawkeye Community College that gives you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at the creation of the piece, and is kind of a good place to start to set up this piece. So we'll start by watching that, and then we'll chat some more about it.
The idea for representing the flood in this piece came to mind for several reasons. I really like rivers, and the Cedar River flows right through the city of Cedar Rapids. And the flood of 2008 is one of the most memorable experiences that has to do with the river and the city. Also, I do have family in Cedar Rapids, and they were affected by the floods. I think that the flood represents two different things to the people of Cedar Rapids. First of all, I think it represents memory. Most people have a memory of that time. Many people lost things, lost their home, lost their belongings, lost childhood haunts to the floods. And so all they really have now are memories of those places and things. And then I also think it represents resiliency, or it means resiliency, a people and a community that can bounce back from a really terrible natural disaster and do so well. I think Cedar Rapids exemplifies that. I struggle to make art that doesn't inform. I guess I'll say that. I think it's one of the roles of art is informing people. It's also sparking curiosity. It's also maybe bringing perspective. Maybe an artist can share something from a perspective that the viewers never thought of before. Definitely think that it's one of the roles of art is to inform the viewer. My work over the last 15 years really has been connected to people, their stories, their struggles, maybe issues that surround them that others can relate to. There was this moment, this spark. I was in the car with some family coming home from a funeral, and we were playing 20 questions to kill the time. It was my turn, and 20 questions later, no one had answered. No one had gotten the figure. It was Kim Jong-il was the person I was trying to get them to think of. And in that moment, I felt this it was an observation and also a frustration that they didn't know who I was trying to get them to talk about. And so I've lived different places, had friends from around the world, and I just got real curious about representing people, places, issues that relate to us locally and to people from around the world.
Okay, so I think that provides a really nice place to start to think about the overall conception of this work and how you arrived at it. And I'm wondering if you could tell us more, as you started working on the piece, were there things that were challenging about this particular site-specific work for you?
Yes, there's always a challenge that presents itself. You just don't always know until you get into the middle of it what that's going to be. So I had a pretty clear image in my mind, but I've never worked with these materials before. So there were a lot of technical things to work on. So what kind of adhesives to use, um, how were we going to get it on the wall? There was actually a part in the video that shows me using the screwdrivers, and you can see these like little pieces of Velcro. And that part of working in collaboration or in communication with others, you saw there were others helping me and put this together. One of the benefits of that is I can brainstorm and problem solve with other people. And so how to attach all these panels to the wall, but not drill directly through the straws, so that a lot of it had to do with basics of gravity and the materials and how to make this come together, because the materials themselves are kind of cheap, everyday objects. So through that idea of massive accumulation of those objects and then crafting them expertly, putting them together, hopefully they transform in from a kind of inexpensive object, everyday object, into art.
Yeah, and you've worked with representing bodies of water in your work before, showing a couple examples here. But here you're using bottles, plastic bottles. And then the piece that we have in the exhibition is these plastic drinking straws. So what was that change like? You mentioned it was a new material for you. So how was that for you? And how did you decide to make that change from working with these objects to the drinking straws?
So here you see a detail of a piece entitled Clean Water that was at the Dubuque Museum of Art. The show had to do with the Mississippi River and the Mississippi watershed. It was in collaboration with the Mississippi River Museum. And the wall spanned, I don't have it right here, it's about 30 feet wide, I believe. And so I had the opportunity to use something connected with water to represent water. So you drink out of a water bottle. And I was able to put about, that several thousand bottles on the wall there. Well, as I mentioned, massive accumulation is important, and the wall for this site-specific installation at Cedar Rapids Museum of Art is a much smaller wall. And so I knew I needed to pivot and find a much smaller object that's still connected with water and drinking a liquid. I brainstormed disposable water bottle caps, so not the bottles themselves, but the caps. Dixie cups, different things that you might drink from. But ultimately, I thought the straw is an interesting object because it's very linear. You can do this. I wanted the sculpture to kind of undulate on the wall, and you can do that with these linear objects. You could get them in a variety of colors. It does specifically reference drinking, and when you've got a flood, access to clean drinking water is difficult, and so there's still a connection there with water and material, but the material was a lot more conducive to the scale of this piece and something different. So instead of like a circular object that is in a grid, these are linear objects that, as I said, worked really nicely to create that flow of the water, the rippling effect of the water.
Great. I wanted to ask too, you mentioned in the video that you like to create art that informs.
Mm.
Um, and I was wondering about that and how you kind of approach creating pieces that almost seem to like visualize information, or sort of map a place in a way into your artwork. So how do you go about that in your process, and how does that manifest for you?
That's a great question. It's not something I really thought about until you asked it to me the other day. Because I think things happen organically and I get
Mhm.
lost in the process and don't think through all of this. So I really feel like there's this idea of visualizing information and then I'm going to balance the data or the information with the poetic because ultimately this isn't a textbook, it's a gallery, it's art. So, for example, the flood of '08, or I guess I could use clean water as an example. I don't know if you have a preference. This is another piece with the water bottles. It's a 40-foot long wall at Waterloo Center for the Arts. And it's taking the shape of a section of the Zambezi River. So I used Google Earth and I found a section of the river that uh, was along the border of Zimbabwe. And I had met someone from Zimbabwe, an international student. I painted his portrait, interviewed him, and he told these stories of collecting water because clean water access is quite difficult in Zimbabwe. And so the water bottle symbolizing, again, drinking water, but uh, I use Google Earth, but I hand drew the shape. I projected the shape. We're using irregular form. So there's a simplification that happens. There's the hand drawn element, which gives evidence of the human touch. So while you can tell that maybe this is a section of a river, or maybe you can tell Flood '08 is a section of the Cedar River. There's also this idea, and that's the Mississippi River. But if you go, it's the flood. There's, I hand drew those shapes, but the map that it's based upon has things like bridges and roads and city boundaries and all of these details that I did not include. And in fact, when this was in process, my husband said, would, I consider including some of the bridges in indicating where bridges were on the piece. And then for local viewers, the idea would be it would be easier to pinpoint where you live or where you work because you could see that. But I opted against including that detail because I thought it would break up those undulating flows of the straws. And so the poetic movement of the river took priority over the accuracy of the detailed information. So it's kind of like I'm visualizing information, but then there's room for intuitive decisions and spontaneity and poetry, maybe over
Mm,
precise information accuracy. So,
sure.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that
Really
answers your
interesting.
question.
No, it absolutely does. Yeah. You've also done work that is more kind of immediately identifiable as being a landscape. Um, and you engage with the land and with place in a lot of your pieces, including the piece that's in the exhibition, Flood '08, obviously is dealing a lot with place. So how do these ideas of landscape, how do you think of them in your work? What does that idea of landscape mean to you in your work?
It's another great question. So I would say that I define landscape in my work as inspired by or reflective of the land, its resources, and even its people. So I often reference the land through the use of maps, which you've seen in the last three pieces.
Mhm.
I really enjoy both the aesthetics and function of the maps. The maps are more of like a symbol of the land rather than traditional landscape imagery. This particular piece is a traditional landscape. It's hard to tell in the photograph, but I've actually integrated a map of this. This is a creek in Wisconsin, Reed's Creek. We hiked this in my back in 2022, actually, and I imposed in the sky the map of the creek and the road and the parking lot where we parked at this exact section of this creek that flows many miles in the driftless region. Then I kind of layered in clouds. It's harder to see in the photographic representation than it is in the actual piece. So that would be another kind of simple way to integrate maps. But I've worked with physical maps, road maps, topographical maps, and I hope to someday work with a few other types of maps, weather maps, political maps, and even plant hardiness zone maps. I just think maps are beautiful, but they're also a symbolic way to integrate some idea, some sense of place.
Yeah, interesting. And a few more examples there of works dealing with the land. And you were talking to me a little bit about this work yesterday when we were touching base, but I'm wondering if you could talk more about this one as well.
Sure. So, what I'm working on now, one series I'm working on are a series of what I'm calling wall quilts. So, they're grid, they use grid and they're inspired by historic quilt patterns. This one is a study for a large-scale wall quilt. So far, I've made one large-scale wall quilt that's exhibited a few places, and it spans about 9 feet by 12 feet. This one, right now, it's at 1 feet by 2 feet. This whole piece is representative of a single block in the quilt. Once it would be realized, it would be about 4 feet by 8 feet wide. And so this piece is entitled Runoff, and it is looking at, I was interested in the idea of American regionalism and this nobility of the agrarian lifestyle, agrarian farmer, and how that's portrayed in pieces like Young Corn, actually, at Cedar Rapids Museum. I love that painting. And then contrasting that with some of the practices of corporate farming and agricultural runoff and the impact it's had on our communities. We actually invited Art Cullen, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who wrote about one of these issues of runoff in a court case in the Des Moines area several years ago. He was a guest speaker here at our school last year. He was fascinating. And then I'm actually a breast cancer survivor, and it's not genetic. And sometimes, when you're talking about environmental causes of cancer, one of those can be things like water quality and pollution and things. So anyways, it just interests me. And so this piece is reflective of the land. You can kind of see the hills, and the text is almost used to show crop rows vertically in the three of the blocks. You can see the trees. And I'm using fabric and rice paper with inkjet print and paint to create this work, and a lot of my collage work involves that mixed media.
Great. And you often engage with issues, problems that are affecting society. The series that's on the screen right now is Dreamers and Dictators. So how do you see art and art making? How does that impact how you engage with these topics? What does that allow you to do? And why do you feel that you're drawn to these different subjects?
Well, so I think I'm drawn to these subjects because I just love people and I love their stories. And so anytime you get to know someone, they have a story. And so, and then I enter into, like caring about their story and their experiences. And so a lot of the pieces that have to do with some kind of social issue, typically it stems from me knowing someone impacted. And so this contrasts actually on the screen right now. Hai Hang was an international student of mine at Wartburg. He was from China. And then, oops, and my light automatically turned off in my office. And then contrasted next to him is a portrait of Hu Jintao. That was the former Prime Minister of China. Currently, it's Xi. But anyways, Hai Hang's story was really interesting. He was so upset because he had not learned about the Tiananmen Square massacre from 1989 in any of his classes growing up. He did not learn about it till he was at Wartburg in the US studying. And that is just due to information access and censorship. And so that actually brought about the other wall quilt that you showed that was called Great Firewall. And so that has to do with information access. And so the Chinese government employs 30,000 people to keep built and protected this great firewall that prevents the Chinese citizenry from doing different kinds of internet searches. And so I was playing around with the idea of the Great Wall of China, which is physical, the Great Firewall of China, which is more virtual. And so you can see the bricks. I actually collaborated with this on this piece with Lindsay Bueller, a friend and colleague of mine who's a librarian. She cares a lot about information access and art history. So there's elements of art history woven throughout this piece. And so anyway, some of the social issues that I get not excited about, concerned about would be maybe more appropriate term, have to do with people and friends and experiences. And so how does art then allow me to speak to that?
Yeah.
I think, well, it's my language. So we all have our ways of communicating, and I'm more of a visual communicator, and art is my discipline. It's how I can say something or do something. It's through art. And I like the freedom that art provides. I don't have to have answers, and I can even present. There's such contradictions like in everything. And so I can have these contradictory things. I can have this like plastic, solid, opaque form representing fluid natural water and those kind of relationships, or here presenting the image of a dreamer and a dictator contrasting one another, and how that represents so much about our world and our humanity and our experiences. So art is the language I guess I choose and I think I use best.
Great. I know that for this series with the Dreamers, you spent time with them and talked with them and kind of learned their stories, and that's incorporated into the finished piece. And I know with Flood '08, you also had other people working with you to create and finish the piece. And so I'm wondering about ideas of community and collaboration in your work, and if community feels like something that is important to you in your work, and how you think about it and how it impacts your work.
Sure. Yeah, all of your questions are fantastic, Julia. That's another good one. Another good one. So, okay, community. I do love working with others, and I like cultivating a sense of community. I like belonging, and I like others to feel like they belong. I attempt to do this in my studio classroom. I teach. I attempt to do this in my home, in my community at large. I love it when I can use my work to help cultivate that community amongst creatives, students, neighbors, friends. So I've interviewed local people to use as subjects for my work, as you see evidenced here. I've also collaborated with like local elementary school students and art teachers to work clean water. The first iteration was help a whole like hundreds of elementary students helped with that project. They even helped install it in the museum. And so I think doing things together is just so much better. We can brainstorm ideas, problem solve, have fun. As I mentioned earlier, I got a lot of help from some of my colleagues with technical concerns on Flood '08 and problems I've never had to solve before. Like, how do you install, drinking straws on this, wood panel? And so, yeah, and then I think my personality also, I think it's called an omnivert, where you're kind of on this border between extrovert and introvert. And so I both love solitude time, but I also thrive, like I balance that with some time with others. And so collaborative art practice really gives me energy. So I'm thankful for, community.
Great, wonderful. I know we're running a little short on time, so I wanted to open it up for a minute and see if anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask Jennifer. And if not, I have a couple more to finish up with. So any questions for Jennifer?
Jennifer, this is Sean Ulmer. How are you?
Great, Sean. How are you?
Great, thank you. I had a question for you about your use of straws. I understand, this is about drinking and about scale, and those that's a great knowledge to share. But I also wondered, the straws are a very charged um, uh, commodity in contemporary society. They're not freely given out because at restaurants and everything because of what they can do to the environment. I know that the um, the topic or the subject of the piece is not about the environment or pollution per se, but was that something that you were thinking about when you ultimately decided to use the straw in addition to its scalability to this particular project? Were you thinking, because you certainly have found a great use for plastic straws that was not their original intended use, but but it is, as I said, a very much a charged um, commodity in
Yes.
contemporary society.
Yes, Sean, that's really great question. And yes, I did think about this because, for example, with the water bottles, okay, so environmental concerns are important to me. And the water bottles, it's like I had um, my students and local Boy Scout troops like collecting used water bottles because I was determined to not go buy water bottles and dump the water out. And how much plastic pollution. In fact, this piece at Butte Museum of Art was all about pollution and the effect on the Mississippi watershed and the Gulf Coast and the idea of plastic. And so, as I was brainstorming through Flood, I looked at the recyclable cardboard straws, knowing that yes, these straws are in some states are completely banned, and I opted for the plastic because while Flood '08 is not specific to pollution, you know that when they're, well, first of all, we don't know with climate change how much effect that's having on all of our weather patterns. Also, the idea that when a flood occurs, there's a lot of, with the devastation is a lot of pollution and things that happen. And I decided that it was okay to use plastic drinking straws for this project because it wasn't drinking it and throwing it away. It was using it for something more permanent. And in fact, the shine of the plastic, the fact that it's plastic and not biodegradable paper, felt more significant also. And and I acquired these straws. I had contemplated, you get on Amazon and you can order things from around the globe. I ended up going to a local food distributor to get the straws. I felt a little better about not importing them, but driving over to, locally to grab the straws. So, and supported a local business and whatever, even though so that was a thought, even though that was not necessarily like the primary information or messaging of the piece. It was definitely something I considered in all of this. Yeah, thank you for asking that, Sean.
Well, thank you for your response. That's very, very helpful. I know, and in the aftermath of the flood, the flood churned up all kinds of pollution, and at the edges of, the rising waters, you would find all kinds of things that were brought downstream from miles and miles away, but also churned up from being in the cedar itself. And so I think it's a very apt piece because it's for those of us who went through the flood, who experienced it firsthand. This was one of the byproducts. This is what you saw. You saw there was a pollution byproduct to this, and then everything that the flood touched, began to rot. Many of
Yes.
the things began to rot, and it was creating pollution, if you will. I mean, the air was very unhealthy for a while, and it was, was particularly hot. It was June, and it was really steamy, and it was all airborne, and it was, and then people were breathing. It was very unhealthy. It was a very unhealthy moment, and that all came about. They were all byproducts, I guess, in a way,
Yeah.
of the flood itself. And so I know that wasn't your primary point in the creation of this piece, but I think it's a very apt medium to touch on that little aspect that was also sort of a byproduct of the actual experience of the flood.
Thank you for sharing that. That's interesting. Like an interesting perspective. I'm thinking of that churning and then all the things that just kind of come up to the edges. That's not, it's visual, but not a beautiful visual. It's, yeah.
Any other questions for Jennifer? And I actually have one more for you as kind of a final question here for us. I know you mentioned that you've been busy with classes this semester, so you haven't had a lot of time to work on your work. But what is next for you? What's coming up? Do you have projects that are in the pipeline that you can tell us about? We're interested in hearing what you're working on next.
Yeah, well, I think it's a time for me to kind of I want to kind of make more and new work. So I'm working on several series. One of the series is exploring more of these wall quilts. I have several avenues to take this. I've got several more pieces that are inspired by a lot of the stories and the interviews. So these wall quilts are kind of important to me for lots of reasons. My mom is an avid quilter, and I feel like part of the reason I'm an artist is from watching her carefully cut and piece. And she always is making now, or even when I was younger. And so and half of these fabrics are from her stash, actually. That's what quilters call their large collection of fabrics. And so I'm really interested in more original pattern making and exploring more issues, as well as possibly doing a series based on movements in art history. I'm an educator, and so I just started teaching art history 1 for the first time last semester, and I would love to visualize Etruscan art and all of these periods and movements in art, and use these as even teaching tools and ways to visualize that. So that's, and then one other series, well, actually 2 more. So I need to make is what I need to do. Can you tell? That's where I'm at. A series entitled Parables, kind of exploring interpretations of biblical parables and the land. A lot of them have to do with the land. And then exploring, so I mentioned that I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I've had a lot of ideas surrounding that. And this runoff quilt kind of got me started on thinking with that being maybe a little bit more vulnerable or personal with my work. And so I don't know yet, yeah, how that's going to work, but yeah, so this piece is currently at the Figge Museum, and other than that, I'm looking towards new work in the future. So
Great. Well, I'm excited to see where these ideas go. So you'll have to keep us posted.
thank you, Julia.
Yes. Well, we will stop there. Thank you so much again, Jennifer, for being here today. We really appreciate your time and your wonderful answers to these questions, and sharing your work with us. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah. Thank you,
And
everyone.
thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Keep an eye out for our next programs related to our exhibitions, and we'll hope to see you there. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day.